The night pressed down on him like something physical, heavy and suffocating. Elvis sat in his car, a Lincoln Continental he'd bought on impulse because someone said it suited him, parked in the driveway of Graceland, engine running, hands on the steering wheel, going nowhere. Inside the house, people were waiting, staff, friends who weren't really friends, hangers-on who needed things from him, his father wanting to talk business, his mother's empty chair at the dining table, the space she'd left behind 2 years ago, still raw and aching like an open wound that wouldn't close. It was 1960. He was 25 years old. The army years were behind him. He was back to making movies and records and being Elvis Presley, which felt less like being himself and more like playing a character someone else had written. He was exhausted, not just tired, exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't fix, exhausted from performing, from smiling, from being what everyone needed him to be, while forgetting entirely what he needed for himself. The radio played softly, one of his own songs. He turned it off. He put the car in reverse and backed out of the driveway without telling anyone where he was going. Didn't know himself. Just knew he needed to move. Needed to be somewhere that wasn't here. The gates of Graceland closed behind him, and he drove south, away from Memphis, away from the city lights, into the darkness of Highway 51, where the road stretched empty and black and infinite ahead. He drove for an hour without destination, windows down, letting the October night air fill the car with the smell of turned earth and distant smoke from someone's fireplace. The radio stayed off. The silence was better. Silence didn't want anything from him. The highway unrolled like film through a projector, headlights cutting tunnels through the darkness. Occasional farms passed by, their windows glowing warm and intimate, little boxes of life where people ate dinner and argued about small things and didn't wonder if any of it mattered. Elvis envied those lit windows, envied the smallness, the anonymity, the luxury of being nobody. His hands ached from gripping the steering wheel. His jaw hurt from clenching it. His chest felt tight like something was sitting on it, making breathing difficult. He'd been feeling this way for weeks, disconnected, floating, like he was watching his own life from outside his body, and couldn't figure out how to get back in. The movies were garbage. He knew it. Everyone knew it, but nobody said it, because he made them money. The songs they gave him weren't the kind he wanted to sing. Gospel, that's what he wanted. Music that meant something. Music that reached toward God, instead of girls screaming his name. But nobody cared what he wanted. They cared about what he could give them, what he could earn, what he could be for them. He saw the gas station appear like a mirage in the distance, a small oasis of light against the darkness, a single island in an ocean of empty fields. The sign said, "Open 24 hours," in faded red letters. One pump, one small building with a light on inside. Elvis pulled in without thinking. He didn't need gas, but he needed to stop. Needed to be around another human being who didn't know him, didn't want anything, didn't have expectations. He turned off the engine and sat in the sudden silence, listening to the tick of cooling metal, watching moths circle the overhead light, like tiny prayers ascending. The door chimed when Elvis pushed it open. The smell hit him immediately. Coffee, motor oil, something sweet and stale. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in harsh white light that made the small store feel both exposed and somehow intimate. A man stood behind the counter, old, maybe 60, maybe 70, with the kind of weathered face that came from a lifetime of work outdoors. He wore a simple work shirt with the name Roy stitched over the pocket. He was reading a newspaper spread across the counter, reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked up when Elvis entered. No recognition, no double take, just the mild interest of a shopkeeper seeing a customer. "Evening," Roy said. "Evening," Elvis replied, keeping his voice neutral, his face turned slightly away out of habit. "Get you something? Just coffee if you got it. Fresh pot about an hour ago. Help yourself." Roy gestured to a coffee maker in the corner, went back to his newspaper. Elvis poured coffee into a styrofoam cup, added sugar, stirred slowly just to have something to do with his hands. The silence was comfortable. Roy didn't push conversation, didn't seem to need anything from him. Elvis brought the coffee to the counter to pay. Roy rang it up, 25 cents. "Out late," Roy observed. Not a question, just a statement. "Couldn't sleep," Elvis said. "Driving helps sometimes." "Know the feeling. Used to drive trucks before I bought this place. Long hauls, just me and the road and the radio. Peaceful, you know. World can't reach you when you're moving." Elvis nodded. "Yeah, exactly that." Roy studied him with eyes that had seen a lot of people over a lot of years. "You look tired, son. More than just tonight tired." Something in Elvis's chest cracked slightly. "I am. Real tired." "Life beating you up?" "Something like that." Roy folded his newspaper, took off his reading glasses. "Can I tell you something? And you can tell me it's none of my business, and that's fine. But you got a look I've seen before." "What look?" "The look of a good man carrying too much. The look of someone who's forgotten how to put things down." Elvis's throat tightened. He stared at his coffee. "I don't know you," Roy continued. "Don't know your story. But I can see you're tired. Not just body tired. Soul tired. And sometimes all a person needs to hear is that it's okay to be tired. That being tired don't make you weak. Makes you human." Elvis couldn't speak. Couldn't trust his voice not to break. "Whatever you're carrying," Roy said gently, "it's heavy. I can see that. But you're still standing. That means you're stronger than you think." "I don't feel strong." Nobody does when they're in the middle of it. Strength isn't about not being tired. It's about keeping going even when you are. Elvis looked up at the old man. Really looked at him. Saw kindness there. Saw someone who'd lived through things and come out the other side still capable of caring about a stranger in his gas station at midnight. "Thank you," Elvis whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me." Roy smiled slightly. "I see you, son. You're a good man. You're just tired, that's all. But you're still here. Still trying. That counts for something." Elvis paid for the coffee and walked back to his car in a daze. His hands shook slightly as he opened the door. He sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine, just sat there in the pool of light from the gas station, moths still circling above him, and felt something break open inside his chest. Tears came without warning, not dramatic sobbing, just quiet tears running down his face, hot and releasing and necessary. He didn't try to stop them. A good man, just tired. Such simple words, such ordinary words. But they were the words he'd needed without knowing he needed them. Permission to be human. Permission to hurt. Permission to admit that the weight was heavy, without being told to be grateful for it. Roy hadn't known who he was. Hadn't seen Elvis Presley, the star, the commodity, the thing that generated money and expectations. He'd just seen a tired young man in his gas station, and offered kindness without asking for anything in return. Elvis sat in that car for 20 minutes, crying quietly, letting the weight lift incrementally, like someone removing stones from his chest one by one. Not all of them. The weight would never fully leave, but enough. Enough to breathe. Enough to remember why he kept going. Eventually, he started the engine. Looked back at the gas station. Roy was visible through the window, back to reading his newspaper, completely unaware that he'd just saved someone's life in the most ordinary way possible. Elvis pulled back onto the highway, heading toward Memphis, toward Graceland, toward all the things that waited for him there. But something was different now. The weight was still there, but it felt more bearable. Shared, maybe. Witnessed. The highway stretched ahead, headlights cutting through darkness that felt less oppressive now. Elvis drove slowly, in no hurry to arrive, wanting to hold on to this feeling for as long as possible. This strange mixture of sadness and relief, exhaustion and hope. He thought about Roy, wondered what his story was, what roads he'd driven as a truck driver, what weight he'd carried that allowed him to recognize it in someone else, whether he had family, whether he was happy running a small gas station in the middle of nowhere. Elvis would never know. Would never see him again, probably. Would never be able to thank him properly for what he'd done, without even realizing he'd done it. And maybe that was perfect. Maybe that's what made it real. The fact that Roy hadn't known who Elvis was, hadn't been impressed or starstruck or wanting something, had just been human to human, person to person, one tired soul recognizing another. The city lights of Memphis appeared on the horizon, that orange glow against the night sky that meant home, whatever home meant when you were Elvis Presley, and home was both everything you needed and everything you wanted to escape. But tonight it felt different. Tonight he could go back, could walk through these gates, and be what everyone needed him to be, because for 10 minutes in a gas station, in the middle of nowhere, someone had let him be nothing, had let him be tired, had let him be human. Elvis never told anyone about that night, kept it private and precious, a memory he could return to when the weight became too much again. And it would become too much again, many times over the years that followed. He thought about driving back to that gas station, finding Roy, telling him thank you, maybe even telling him who he'd been talking to. But he never did. Some things were too fragile to examine too closely. Some moments existed perfectly only because they remained small and private and unrepeated. Years passed. The movies continued, the performances, the expectations, the weight. But on the worst nights, and there were many worse nights, Elvis would close his eyes and remember a small gas station. A man named Roy. Simple words that had somehow been exactly right. You're a good man. You're just tired, that's all. Sometimes that memory was enough. Sometimes it was the only thing that kept him standing. In 1968, during rehearsals for what would become the '68 comeback special, Elvis found himself talking to someone on the production crew, a lighting technician who'd worked long hours and looked exhausted. "You okay?" Elvis asked him. "Yeah," the man said. "Just tired." "That's okay," Elvis heard himself say. "Being tired don't make you weak, makes you human." The man looked at him with surprise and gratitude. "Thanks. I needed to hear that." Elvis smiled. "Someone told me that once. It helped." Later that night, Elvis tried to find that gas station, got in his car and drove south on Highway 51, trying to remember where it had been. But 8 years had passed. The road looked different. Everything looked different. He drove for 2 hours and never found it. Maybe it was gone. Maybe it had never existed in the way he remembered. Maybe grief and exhaustion had transformed an ordinary moment into something transcendent because he'd needed it to be. Or maybe he'd just missed it in the dark. He drove back to Memphis without finding Roy, without getting to say thank you, without getting to tell that old man that 10 minutes of kindness in 1960 had carried someone through years of darkness. But maybe that was okay too. Maybe the point wasn't to close the circle. Maybe the point was to carry it forward. Elvis Presley died in 1977, 42 years old, having lived more in his short life than most people could imagine. Millions mourned. The whole world felt the loss. But somewhere, maybe in Mississippi, maybe in Tennessee, maybe anywhere or nowhere, there might have been an old man who heard the news and remembered a tired young man who'd come into his gas station one October night in 1960. A polite kid who'd needed coffee and maybe needed something more. Or maybe Roy had died years before. Maybe he'd never known who he'd talked to that night. Maybe it didn't matter. Because the point wasn't who Elvis was. The point was what Roy had given him without knowing. Permission to be tired, to be human, to hurt without shame. And Elvis had tried to pass that forward, had tried to be that person for others when he could, had tried to see people the way Roy had seen him, not as what they were to the world, but as what they were to themselves. Some nights, Elvis would stand on the grounds of Graceland, looking out at the darkness beyond the gates, and remember that drive, that gas station, that conversation, that moment of being seen. You're a good man. You're just tired, that's all. The simplest words, the truest words, the words that saved him when he needed saving. And somewhere in the vast machinery of fame and performance, and all the things that made Elvis Presley into Elvis Presley, there remained this one small, perfect moment. A tired young man and an old man behind a counter, sharing coffee and truth at midnight, neither knowing how much it would matter. That's what remains. That's what lasts. Not the songs or the movies or the fame, though those matter too. But the moment someone saw you as human, the moment someone gave you permission to be tired, the moment a stranger saved your life without even knowing they'd done it. That's what Elvis carried until the end. That's what he tried to give back to others. And maybe that's the real legacy, not the king of rock and roll, but the tired young man who learned that kindness between strangers can be everything, that being seen can save you, that the smallest moments sometimes matter most. Rest easy, Elvis. May you finally find the peace you were always searching for. And thank you, Roy, whoever you were, wherever you are, for seeing a tired young man on a long dark night and saying exactly what he needed to hear. Some people save lives with grand gestures. You did it with coffee and truth and 10 minutes of your time. That was enough. That was everything.